Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining this Energy Stewardship webinar. My name is Jennifer Young, and I'm with Michigan Interfaith Power Liy as an Energy Programs Manager. I'm delighted to be facilitating this conversation with you. We are offering this in partnership with the Northwest Lower Michigan Synod of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. I'm advancing my slide, but it's taking a little while, so bear with me here. All right, while we're waiting for that, we'd love to get to know who you are. So if you could drop your name and the congregation or organization you're affiliated with and your role within that congregation in the chat, we'd love to get to know you.
Yep. I'll type it in.
Yeah, so again, feel free to let us know the congregation you're with, your name and your role within that congregation. Thank you, Eric Johnson, Pastor Johnson with All Saints Lutheran. Janice with Prince of Peace of Rose City, thank you. Bev, great to see you from St. Paul. Pastor John, glad you're here. Carol with St. David's Episcopal. It was great speaking with you the other day. Glad you're here. Bob, we were just talking about Faith Lutheran. Glad you're here. All right, well, we'll give folks an opportunity to continue to post in the chat. Thank you for all being here. And with that, we'll get started. So we are Michigan Interfaith Power Liy. Our mission is to inspire and equip people of faith and conscience to exercise stewardship and love for all creation. One of the ways we're doing that is by hosting conversations like these, where as people of faith and conscience, we come together to look at putting faith into action through our values. We were started in 2002. We have grown to encompass over 300 member congregations that engages 30 diverse faith traditions and denominations. And I wanted to share with you a little bit about who I am. So as I mentioned, I'm Jennifer Young. I'm an Energy Programs Manager with Michigan Interfaith Power Liy. I grew up in Michigan. I grew up in Ann Arbor. I actually live in Ferndale now. My interest in the environment was inspired by my father. He took my sister and I to the Earth Day 1990 event. It was the 20-year celebration. And I was in middle school, and we went into this huge conference room and heard Barry Commoner speak. He was a really famous environmentalist at that time. And I said, that's what I want to do. I don't want to be the guy who's up there, but I want to support initiatives where people get inspired to make a difference with the environment. So after that, I went to Eastern Michigan, got a bachelor's in biology, a minor in chemistry, then graduated from the University of Michigan School for Environment and Sustainability with a master's in environmental policy and human behavior. And my first job was working with local governments on collaborative energy projects that helped local governments take leadership when it comes to energy and renewable energy. And that was funded by an American Reinvestment and Recovery Act grant. And when that grant ended, that program ended. And I have since been working at Michigan Interfaith Power Liy, where it's really my privilege to work with faith communities who, in a similar way as local government leaders, set the example for their communities. They are visible pillars in the communities, and people pay attention to what faith communities are saying and doing. A few logistics before we really dive into this. We will email you the link to the recording and the slides, so don't feel like you have to keep track of everything. This is a conversation. We're hoping it's more conversational than it is informational, and in that it's a dialogue. And we would love for you to just jump in and ask your questions while I'm in presentation mode. It's kind of hard for me to see if you're raising your hand, so feel free to speak up, or you can post your message in the chat. So you'll also be hearing from Leah Wisty. She's our executive director, who is also joining us, along with Pastor John Schleicher and Lynn Kraft, who is with the Environmental Stewardship Task Force. So with that, we're going to start a brief poll, but it looks like Leah, I might need you to start the poll because I'm not seeing how to do that. If you have the capability to.
Okay, hold on just a sec.
Okay.
I'm not the host, so I don't know if I can, you should see it on the far right where it says more. If you open that up. Oh, I'm the host now. Okay.
Does everyone see the poll? Can you give us the thumbs up or?
I saw Lynn say yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
The question is, I'll just read it out loud. To what extent is caring for creation and our climate a part of your congregational life? So we're just trying to understand in your community, what is that? Is it central to your ministry? Is it a piece of it, or is it not at all part of the conversation? And I'll keep it up on the screen for another couple.
Leah, when everybody has pretty much responded, can you report the results?
So these are the results. 22% say creation care and climate are integral to our ministry, and about 3/4 say they're to some extent a part of our congregational life.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you for giving us that snapshot. So this is a photo from the flood in Midland in 2020 after the dam collapsed, and there are different reports for why the dam collapsed, as you can imagine, but one of the suspicions is that the dam, which was 90 some years old, just wasn't equipped to handle the amount of rain that was coming through the dam with the unusual amount of rainfall. So this isn't new to Michigan. It's something that we've been seeing a lot more of in the last few years. If you any of you have family or friends in the Southeast Michigan area, Detroit experienced a couple of 500-year storms around this time last year, and people's basements flooded, personal possessions and mementos went to the curb. Causes a lot of tumult for people in their personal lives, and I'm sure it happened all over the state as well. I know, Pastor John, you talked about in Eaton County, the agricultural lands being so inundated with water that they don't really yield crops like they used to. So it's affecting us all over the state. Some other ways that climate is impacting Michigan: temperatures have increased 2 to 3 degrees Fahrenheit. I know that doesn't sound like a lot, and in fact, for some of us, we'd like to see it a little warmer, except on days like today that are record heat waves. But if we think about even in our own bodies, if our temperature was to increase 2 to 3 degrees, what difference that would make in our day-to-day lives. Infrastructure disinvestment, poverty, and COVID, respiratory disease create a layering effect with a lot of these impacts. And we can expect to see more of heat-related illness, waterborne diseases, respiratory diseases, vector-borne diseases, injury, and carbon monoxide poisoning. And this is from the state of Michigan on their climate page. So in a global perspective, you might have heard of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So they release these massive reports, which might be kind of hard to digest, but the bottom line is that they're saying, and this is from their most recent report, that pretty much most of Americans believe this is an issue, but we're not really talking about it. Only 35% are discussing global warming occasionally, at least occasionally. And America is #1, but not really in a good way. So we're #1 in the world for highest production of oil. This is from 2022 statistics. Only followed by Russia, Saudi Arabia, and Canada. So as much as there's increasing understanding that this is an issue we all want to address, we're still ramping up production on a national level. So here's the thing: we can and should reduce our carbon footprints, but that alone is not enough. We also need to expand our ecological imaginations and envision a different world, and to imagine bigger ways to make change. So I'd love to get a volunteer at this point to turn on your microphone and read this statement from Gus Speth. He is an advisor to several presidents and a former dean of the Yale School of Forestry. Is there anyone who'd be willing to volunteer and read this quote?
I can read that. It says, I used to think the top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystems collapse, and climate change. I thought that with 30 years of good science, we could address those problems, but I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with that, to deal with those, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation. And we scientists don't know how to do that.
Thank you, Bob. And social science shows that when people learn about our climate emergency and are given small ways to take action, which are clearly not commensurate with the unfolding crisis, they become discouraged and less likely to act. So this is not to say it's not important to do our part in the ways that we can, but it is to acknowledge that if I think that my responsibility ends at the recycle bin, I might not take some larger actions like being part of my congregational earth keeping team, or spending my time meeting with my council members, or finding other ways to have my voice make a bigger impact as a person of faith or as a person who's a member of a faith community. So the world is on fire and we should shop with canvas tote bags. Not really, and that's just a joke as an example. So here's a quote from Martin Luther. Our Lord has written the promise of the resurrection, not in books alone, but in every leaf in springtime. So there is hope. And so how do we make that transition from grappling with the seriousness of the climate emergency at hand and what we as people of faith can do to address that. So the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America has said a lot about this in the ELCA social statement, Caring for Creation, Vision, Hope, and Justice, adopted nearly 30 years ago. It offers a vision of God's intention for creation and for humanity as creation's caregivers. The climate crisis now reveals our dependence on the web of life, and we know that care for the earth to be a profoundly spiritual matter. And with the understanding that the most severe harms from climate change fall disproportionately upon the most vulnerable communities who are the least able to prepare for and recover from the increasing severe weather events, the urgency of the climate crisis compels us to act. As Lutheran Christians, we confess that both our witness to in God's goodness in creation and our acceptance of caregiving responsibility has often been weak and uncertain. This statement offers a vision of God's intention for creation and for humanity as creation's caregivers, acknowledges humanity's separation from God and from the rest of creation as the central cause of the environmental crisis, recognizes the severity of the crisis and expresses hope and heeds the call to justice and commitment. So what do people of faith have to bring to this issue? We actually have a lot. Moral clarity and courage is something that is a big gift of people of faith and conscience. The ability to influence people, that is really what drew me to this work, is when you amplify the voices of people of faith, people listen. Emphasis on justice, community, and care for the most vulnerable. All of our faith traditions recognize the importance of that. And what else? And this is where I would love to hear from you all. I think it's important that we recognize, what do people of faith and conscience bring to this issue of the climate crisis? So feel free to jump in, unmute yourself, or you can just post in the chat, however you like.
Jennifer, I can offer one perspective. Our faith talks a lot about hope, but it's not, I hope things will get better. It's really a hope that God has given to us, that things ultimately will be renewed and made right. And so it comes from the future, but it comes to us now. And when we trust that and believe that, then we're called to act in accordance with what will eventually be. So to be faithful to God is to live in what God intends and what God ultimately will make happen. So that to me that's kind of freeing, because it says ultimately God will make everything new, but in the meantime, our role is to speak against the forces that are destroying what God has made.
Thank you.
John, this is Bev. I have heard most recently somebody who said, God will work it all out, so why do we have to be concerned about this? And it leaves me not knowing what to say to that person, other than God gave us the tools, or gives us the tools, the knowledge, the capability, and expects us to care for creation. I mean, to me, that's part of the original Genesis story, that we are responsible for caring for this earth. Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, go ahead, Eric.
Oh, go ahead, Marty.
Well, I agree with Bev. We're called to be stewards of everything that God gave us. You know, our monetary gifts, our relationships, our main way of showing love to Him is through stewardship, that everything came from Him. And what I think is challenging, maybe other churches, my church, is stewardship is seen as a ministry, as opposed to just being a tenet, part of the foundation of our faith. And it's it's hard to get it going as a ministry when people feel we have enough ministries.
Right. Got it. Anyone else? So Eric?
Yeah, I was just going to say, and this thought just came to me, that I think one thing that the faith community brings is that I think most of our communities are fairly diverse, with people across the political spectrum. And I think, sadly, climate change and environmental issues today have become so politicized, but it should not be partisan. I mean, this is God's creation, and we are called to care for God's creation. So I think faith communities, there can be people of different backgrounds working together. In their own communities, in their churches, synagogues, mosques, to be good stewards.
Right. That's awesome. Thank you.
Can I ask a follow-up question, Eric? Great to see you, by the way.
Sure, it's good to see you, Leah.
Yeah. From your perspective as a pastor, do you think it's possible to engage politics in a way that is not partisan?
Yes, I do. Because I believe the gospel is very political, because it talks about the common good and God who loves everyone. We are to love our neighbor, and so yes, I think the gospel is political, and I say that a lot.
Amen to that.
I try to stay away from the partisan piece, which is maybe a little tricky today. It's hard. I mean, sometimes just reading a piece of scripture, I've heard some pastors get flack for just reading a piece of scripture, you know. Pastor just has to say to them, hey, that's not me, that's Jesus saying that. So yes, so I think you can, and we should.
Artie, please.
I think another position that we're in is that we shape character. We can influence. I really like the piece you put up about that quote about he thought that this problem was climate change, blah, blah, blah. And then it really, he's concluded it's a set of character flaws within the world population, within the United States population. And it's churches that can, it seems like it's such a slow process, can help reframe people's relationship with goods, with money, with meritocracy, with neighbors, with excellence. I think the church is going to have to use its influence on those things to help people reprioritize and reframe.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, so I'm borrowing a little bit from my executive director, Leah, who will do a better job, no doubt, sharing this story. But the point is just to add one more thing to what people of faith and conscience bring is we create a space for dialogue to happen that it embraces all of our humanity. So Leah has shared that she's a member of this Facebook group called Episcopal Cats with Problems that brings some humor, but also allows people to grieve post when good things, bad things happen, and create a space for us just to be human beings. So faith communities really have the space to hold all of the beauty and the pain that is part of our lives, and something that we need when we're trying to grapple with big issues like the climate crisis. One thing that's been a useful construct for the way that we communicate our work at Michigan Interfaith Power Liy is to think of our work as a three-legged stool. So the first of which is practical actions that we as individuals and as people of faith in our respective faith communities can take. And these are things that you are well familiar with, whether it be being a member of your earthkeeping team and changing out all the lights to LEDs to be more efficient and use less energy, to switching from styrofoam to reusable coffee mugs, to and on and on. You can name all the ways, there are innumerable ways we can take practical actions. But let's not forget about the other legs of the stool, which include systemic, and that could be encouraging your fellow congregants to get out to the polls, regardless of the way you know that they vote, encouraging people to participate in the political process, to meeting with your lawmakers, to yourself getting engaged in at the local or state level in your local government, and letting them know what you as a person of faith believe and value. And then spiritual relationship. So this is the unique role that faith communities can play, is helping us, as Gus Speth was kind of pointing to in that quote, grapple with some of the underlying issues of why we're having these environmental issues on such a global scale. And that is a unique role of faith communities. So I'd love to hear some examples from you all now. And I think I will have to stop sharing my screen in order to start taking notes on that. But yeah, so I'm interested in what your personal examples are of ways that within your faith community or you yourself personally have been involved in any one of those legs of the stool. So I'll share my screen again and start trying to take notes on some of the things that people share. So does anyone have an example of a practical or local action that either you have taken or your faith community has taken as far as environmental stewardship?
I noticed here in Okemos, they are changing out the streetlights, going to LEDs from the sodium. So they're doing things like that. I know in our church, we relamped last fall, went all the LEDs in the sanctuary and the narthex. And the rest of the church is virtually all LEDs as well now. And we'll be putting in a solar system on our roof. I think John can maybe tell you a little more about that, but we want to be moving forward with that this fall. So I think we're trying to make everybody aware that we're doing things, not only us, but in the community as well.
Great. Awesome. Any other practical examples? Pastor John, you might be on mute.
Okay, a couple years ago, we bought a used Volt, and I was just mindful lately because it's not great for long distances because you run out of battery after about 50 or 60 miles. But for local stuff, it's so it's really kind of wonderful to have that, especially with $5 a gallon now for gas. And I know that's not accessible for everybody. I think that we need to push to make transportation available to people, whether their income is very modest or not. But it seems to me, that's something that we can model or even just to drive more slowly. It's one of the things I've been sort of on that kick right now. Just all of those things, again, they're little, but if a lot of us begin to do these things, it begins to make a difference.
Right.
So that's kind of part of my story.
Great. Awesome.
I would say that one of the things that's really bothering me is the complaining about the price of gas. And it deserves complaining. However, I think people are putting the blame in the wrong place. And so my effort, small as it is to try to talk with people who are griping and make them understand, if possible, that it's not one person's fault, that it's a whole long string of interrelated factors. I guess that goes under spiritual relational.
That or systemic, people are going to complain.
Too.
Yeah. Some of them are just lazy, or they just want to blame somebody else. They don't want to take any responsibility for trying to take care of our creation.
Or they've been told by someone that they trust that it's all the fault of this or that or the other person. And they just accept it because that's a simple way of looking at it.
Yeah, like I say, they want to blame
Right.
somebody else,
Right.
whatever they hear, whatever they think.
Awesome. Thank you.
Marty, I see your hand up. Please go ahead.
Oh, thank you.
I think, well, at our church, there's been talk about trying to, I don't know what the word is, not rectify, trying to bring property behind us back to its native state. And what that makes me reflect on is people, there's not an opposition, there's just not support for things like that. From what I've gotten to know about this church, first of all, stewardship, financial stewardship doesn't grow. And so people want to do things that don't cost any money. And if you want to do something that has cost involved, then you have to write a grant or you have to talk the church into giving up something else. So this brings me back to that quote you put up is not only can we be examples, I don't know if this is a fourth leg to the stool, but it costs money to do the right thing, to take care of the earth. And it feels like, the examples we're listing are good steps, but we're kind of slow coming to the table. And so it's hard to convince people we should be leaders when we have been some of the last followers to make change. I think partly because of being good stewards of our financial gifts. But churches don't want to give anything up either. My church doesn't want to do anything that costs money. That's how I feel.
Sure. Yeah.
Marty, that's not just limited to churches. I worked for a company that felt the same way.
Well, I think this points to, the other legs of the stool, systemic changes and spiritual and relational changes, right? These are certainly the things that are top of mind, clearly in this group, and I think for Americans in general, are some of these practical changes. But what about systemic, spiritual, and relational changes? What examples can you think of?
Well, I'll go back to the property behind us. If that gets going, I mean, I think that part of the hesitation, when you talk about relational, is we don't all have relationship with nature, or we don't recognize our relationships with nature. And so the more we can do to expose people to the beauty of God's gifts, the more we can inspire them to get on board.
Yep, that's a beautiful example. I heard embedded in some of the things that I think John and Bob also said, I think Bob was saying LED streetlights, lamping, and solar. And then we also try to tell people about it, right? That's a way of educating. That's a way of changing visible social norms. So I would absolutely put that under systemic changes. And John talked about modeling, right? So doing the practical stuff, but also it's very visible. So you're a model. Someone sees you driving down the highway in a Chevy Volt, they know it's an electric car, right?
And Marty, you were talking about how your congregation doesn't want to spend any money. You just could maybe individually ask somebody, have you replaced your old furnace with a more efficient one, your old air conditioner with more efficient one? Have you added insulation in your attic? I'll bet you most of those people probably would have done something like that, and that costs money. They did that. It's the right thing to do. And I know it's hard to spend money, but that's, maybe they're not seeing the big picture. Just
some, I don't remember who it is. It's some energy efficiency business association. They talk about, your average building wastes 30% of the energy that it uses, right? Through poor insulation, through air leakage, because of having old, inefficient light bulbs and systems, right? So there's a lot of energy waste. So it's actually pretty easy to frame something like energy efficiency. Certainly it's an upfront investment, and that's something you have to convince people of, but it's absolutely something that pays off in the medium long terms, which is a great segue.
That's a great segue. And really bringing us to the purpose of this webinar. So we talked about energy stewardship and why energy stewardship for faith communities. Well, energy is a great place to begin practicing stewardship. Electricity, according to this chart, is about 25% of all of the greenhouse gas emissions. Commercial and residential make up about 13%, and our faith community places of worship would fall in this category. Just a couple of local examples. I wanted to share briefly about University Lutheran Church in East Lansing. This is a church really similar, Bob, to what Faith Lutheran has done. They've replaced all of their interior lighting throughout the building, including the sanctuary, with from those old fluorescent tubes that were very inefficient to LEDs that use a lot less energy and cost a lot less to operate. They've replaced the parking lot lighting, and they've installed solar. And they did a lot of that in partnership with Michigan Interfaith Power Liy, and through reaching out to their local utility consumers energy. So part of the role that we can play is helping faith communities connect with resources for exercising creation care. And one of those is the rebates and discounts available from your local utility. So they reached out and they were quoted $25,000 on the parking lot lighting project from the contractor who gave them the quote. after they met with the consumer's energy advisor and looked at all of the discounts and incentives that were available for swapping them out with more efficient LEDs, the whole project cost $1,000. So there are definitely ways, even if your congregation is very conscious about what you're spending, where you can make the case that we spend a little, we get a lot in the long run. This is also an exciting story because the solar project was in part a gift from the neighbor in East Lansing. It's the Islamic Center of East Lansing, which shares a border on the property, and they couldn't do community solar because of the regulations, but instead they said, hey, we've done solar, we would like to gift it to you. They made a gift to that essentially paid for about 50% of the project at University Lutheran Church, and those panels just went up about a year ago. We have more about University Lutheran's story on our YouTube channel, as they gave a webinar, and you could hear from Dale and Judy Kindle from that congregation specifically about that. And I think Leah will drop a link to that YouTube video in the chat if you're interested. Grace Lutheran just recently installed solar, and it's visible from the road, which is one of the great things about this project. But I'd love to hear from anyone who's involved with that project, or Pastor John, if you would be willing to share a few words about how Grace Lutheran conceived of and implemented that solar project. Pastor John, are you?
John, you need to unmute.
Oh, I thought I was, sorry.
Okay.
So Grace had a long history of a pastor who had been there for like 20 some years that was always about justice and always about the voiceless and the people that didn't have much power. So there was always this awareness of the other and God's call to work for justice. The pastor that left about 4 or 5 years ago really was an advocate of speaking out prophetically about climate change, but it was like his single song, and he wasn't able to really bring people into that fervor and that passion very well. But he sowed seeds, and he, even though it didn't really take hold very well. So when I came there as the interim, the first thing they had to face was, are we even, because we're a city church in a difficult neighborhood, a struggling community in many ways, are we even going to be here? And so out of a lot of conversations, then there was a growing sense that, yes, we have a purpose in our history about caring for others. And it wasn't a big step to say, and we care for creation as well. So we started doing things like replacing windows, and then I just suggested, I wonder what would happen if we did solar. And they had lots of questions. So for the rest of you that aren't at that point yet, it does take a lot of time and listening to questions, take them seriously, try to get honest answers. But ultimately, they raised virtually enough to do the whole thing. And when they got done, I saw the first month after it was turned on, and their electric bill was zero, except for the fees to stay in the grid, maintenance kind of stuff. And I haven't been there for a couple of years, so I don't know how it's doing over time, but my sense is, and maybe Jennifer a little bit more, but my sense is that this was just kind of an amazing way, in the fact that they put it on that south roof and it's on the highway, to kind of say to the world, this matters. But importantly for them too, that we've got we don't have limitless reserves or income, and if our electric bill is almost negligible, just think what we can do with the money that we would have spent that way. So that's in a relatively short form, that's the story.
Right. Every dollar you save from what you would have paid on utility bills is a dollar that can go into ministry or mission. I think that's a great point. So I'd love to hear from others. Are you part of an earth keeping team within your congregation? What are the projects that you're working on or interested in? What have you accomplished, or what would you be interested in being supported to achieve? Dennis, it looks like you're talking, but you're on mute.
Yes, I've spoken with John a couple times about this and been to another meeting and heard more about it. And I've been looking into trying to get estimates on putting solar on our building. I was trying to do all the legwork so that the council wouldn't have to, but I've got to get more people involved. Our stewardship committee is involved. I've got 5 people there, and we're in the process of looking at that. We are pretty new at all this. We do have a paper gator on our property that people use, and we try to get people to use it properly. The paper gator only takes certain items, and unfortunately, some people put things they shouldn't be putting in there. And that's, there's a lot of difficulties with trying to recycle papers and other items like that. We're just trying to do more education to the congregation. And in August, we're going to start having each one of us on the committee is going to speak for about 3 to 5 minutes before the service about something. One of them will be about the paper gator, one will be about plastic recycling, one will be about the Myers plastic bag recycling, and a couple other things that we've got in mind. And then we've got to go to something else. But it's just thought of as an educational process that we need to educate the people that we see, and hopefully the word will get out and things will start changing. But we're pretty far behind all of you at this point in all of your discussions, it seems. And but I'm starting to get things moving.
Great.
You're not behind us. We're just starting. We're pulling together a 5-person team that will be evaluating, working with John, what possibilities there are, what the low-hanging fruit is, and what maybe the long-term goals might be for some of the changes that we're doing. When we were talking earlier about the 3-legged stool, I wanted to add that under the spiritual leg, we should always put prayer. And I would like to see us pray differently about creation. I know we need to thank God for the beauty of creation that surrounds us, but we also need to talk about God inspiring us to work to abate climate change, to protect the creation that He's given us, and to nurture the gift of creation. So I'd just like to see us focus not just on thank you, God, for what you've given us, but inspire us, God, to take ownership of this great gift and do the right things to care for it.
I totally agree. Thank you for sharing that, Bev. And I think what's frustrating is, church approaches are, let's start small, let's get going, and we're behind and we're starting. And I feel that too, but like now there's some urgency. And so I feel like the spiritual side, like we can do projects to be examples, to kind of demonstrate that we're putting our money where our mouth is, or we're, walking our talk. But I think, I don't know if this is what Bev's getting at, but we really have to change people's hearts and minds in prayer and the spiritual side. I mean, I know we're not supposed to guilt people into being better Christians, but I mean, I feel like we have to own our participation in getting here. And I guess that's all.
Yeah, these are awesome, all of this.
I like what Marty said about the urgency thing. That may not by itself lead to action, but if the IPCC is right, we don't have a lot of time to keep things from getting far catastrophic. So if people can grasp, again, that's a fine line there, but if they can grasp that this is a dire situation that we face and already are experiencing, that's at least part of the story. But you have to love people too, and not beat them up about this. So that's the guidance of the Spirit, I think, to do that in a way that people know that you care about them and not trying to just change them, because it's so important. So
I think too, the youth is a resource. I'm kind of stymied. Like I was born in 1960, just as I was exiting school. I mean, when I was like in middle school, schools were emerging with some messaging about recycling. And then I got the impression that kids following me in school got quite a bit or more education. And then it feels like there's a generational issue here. Like then it stopped. Like I thought kids were going to take it into their homes and educate their parents, and then they were going to be the next generation. And I don't know what happened. That didn't happen. But the point of all this is, tapping into our youth to help us with the messaging.
Yeah. Great. Well, I want to leave you with a few practical actions that can be something that faith communities can immediately engage in, whether it be a youth service project, a way to get the youth involved, or an earth-keeping team project, or wherever you want to start. All faith communities throughout the state have utilities that offer incentives and discounts for energy efficiency. Our major utilities in the state, DTE Energy and Consumers Energy, specifically offer free energy efficiency assessments with a consumer's energy advisor to walk through your building and identify opportunities for energy saving. These usually are accompanied by free LED lighting replacement, sometimes smart thermostats, and other free upgrades. This is thanks to legislation that Michigan Interfaith Power and Light helped advocate for, and we're all paying for it in a small fee on our energy bill, so you might as well take advantage of it. So if you haven't already, please visit our website. The page is called Light the Way. Leah is dropping that link in the chat. Thank you, Leah. It's free. Even if you don't know whether or not you qualify, go ahead and sign up for it on that registration page, because we can get in contact with you and find out who, if it's not consumers, who is your utility provider, and make sure that you're connected with those opportunities. Identifying a project as many of you have already done, is a great first step. Lighting is usually a large energy use in a place of worship, accompanied by heating and cooling, and there's things you can do. When you participate in those faith community programs, whether it be with Consumers Energy or DTE, they follow up with a report outlining the recommendations for steps you can take. Those include, the estimated cost of the project, what the rebates are, how long the project takes to pay for itself before you basically paid it off because of all the energy and money that you're saving. We also have a page called Next Steps. So next steps is after you've done the free introductory assessment walkthrough with your consumers or your utility representative, where do you go from there? And so we feature congregations like University Lutheran or Faith Lutheran who have done great projects and are already seeing the benefits of saving energy because of having taken initiative. So we share their stories and provide examples for how your faith community can do that. I also want to just mention that I'm fully available. My role is to be a resource to you and assisting you in your energy stewardship journey. You can book yourself an appointment on my calendar with the link that is on the slide here. And I believe Leah's dropping that in the chat as well. I'd love to speak with you. So please feel free to reach out, even if you have the smallest question about what your faith community is thinking about. And finally, it takes a village. So everyone's gifts are welcome and needed. As Gus Beth said in his quote, he thought it was the scientists and the engineers who are going to solve the world's problem, and realized it really takes all hearts and minds, as Marty mentioned. So whether your role is in the green team or you're a clergy member, we also need to get the staff in the loop and then engage the whole congregation. I spoke with the People's Church in East Lansing, and the sustainability director there said, yep, we did a project, and then we shared it with the project through bulletin announcements and communications to the whole congregation. So they knew what we were doing at every step along the way. And then when we did our next project, they had already been seeing the benefits and there was buy-in to take the next step. So be sure to welcome everyone into this process. And remember, it is about all three legs of the stool. So whether you're starting with an energy efficiency project or a solar project, or you're just starting by forming an earth-keeping team, or you're just bringing congregational, the thought about earth stewardship into congregational life, whatever aspect that you're starting with, it's valuable. Please begin it. And thank you so much. And with that, I just want to open it up, and I know we're at time, but if there are any questions or comments, I'd love to hear from you.
Interesting to hear other people's comments and situations, so I appreciate that. Good luck to everybody.
Thank you. Pastor John, I think you might be on mute.
I think I'd learned by now. Okay. I just want to say Jennifer and Leah both, I think, really can be invaluable in terms of encouraging you and, just being really practical about stuff. And I know that Leah particularly will always push you to think not just about what you're doing for your building or what you're doing locally, but for the marginalized and the people most hurt by climate change too. So this is sort of a lifelong journey that we're all on right now. And it's as many people say, this is the biggest challenge for this generation, for those of us who are alive now, to do our best to mitigate as best we can the worst effects of what seems to be coming. So I just commend these two folks that have led this tonight, and wish all of you well. I was named a couple times to help folks, give some coaching, and I'd be glad to do that with others if you're interested in just somebody to walk with you for a while. I usually do that for at least a year or two, once every 6 weeks or so. I can't do 100 of those, but I can do a few. So, yeah.
Yeah, Pastor John, could we share your contact info with folks and a follow-up to this presentation?
Yeah, and I can put it on the screen now, or do you want to close it now? I can.
No, you can drop it in the chat, but I was thinking for those who registered and weren't able to attend, maybe we could also send it out in the follow-up email.
We'll do that.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Yes, Lynn.
Real quickly, those of you that are participating in this tonight, are all of you part of the Environmental Stewardship Task Force email list? Do you receive an email from us? Generally, they come from me whenever. I mean, if you're not on that list, I think it'd be good for you to be part of that. So if you want to be on that list, and I'm not sure, I'm not real good at doing this, so I'd like to ask you to write down my email list if you want to try to be on that, and if you're not on it at this point. It's LD and then KRACHT@gmail.com. It's actually my last name, ldcraft@gmail.com. So if you're not on that list, and you'd like to be, because we certainly can use more participants on that committee or on that task force. And I want to add my thanks to Jennifer and Leah again tonight too. I think this went real well, and the participants asking some good questions and sharing some good comments. So it's nice that we were able to provide this. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Pastor John and Lynn, for helping put this together. And thank you all for being part of this conversation and all your valuable insights.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any questions? Just one last call. Any questions about what your next step is? If you're going to take one step after this, what is it going to be? And a hint, I put it in the chat. My suggestion is, you have many options here, but my suggestion is we presented a lot of information and a lot of possible things you could do, but I really recommend just reaching out to Jennifer to have a conversation, and she can provide that one-to-one kind of support. Also, John's offer to help coach your congregation, through doing a green team or something is awesome. John has, 50 years of experience in ministry, and of course was your former bishop. So that's pretty golden as well. So take advantage of that.
Thank you.
Lynn is also quite experienced at leading the Earth Keeping initiative at his congregation too. So a lot of wisdom in this one.
So long, everybody.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Night. Bye.